right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no horns.
Yeah, no horns, and very kind of, it has a lot of ska on it, but it's a punk ska record, right?
Yeah.
And so I kind of got all of those things at once. And so the Blue Meanies to me were like, it was just interesting. It was like, you can be Hepcat where it's really laid back and traditional. You can be, Dance Hall Crashers where it's like kind of, punk. You can be Mustard Plug where it's kind of like fun and back then anyway, fun and almost silly at times. They had like, Thigh High Nylons and these, goofy songs, or you could be, you could be serious, like, Mephistopheles felt really serious. I mean, obviously there were probably a lot of jokes in there too, but I was a little kid. I didn't understand. And then Blue Meanies was like, it was almost, I don't even know how to describe it. It was like high art, I don't know. It was and also just chaos, it was so, it was like Prague or something to me,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I want to talk about a story, a Blue Meanie story where you watched Billy Spunk be interviewed on radio on your high school campus. Can you tell the story?
Well, so my high school had a radio station, which is a very weird thing. We had a real FM radio station.
So wait, so you went to high school, Glenview, Illinois? Is that?
Yeah, Glenview, Illinois. Yeah. Yeah. And I went to a high school called Glenbrook South. And the thing with Glenbrook South is that an old church had a radio station, had an FM radio station, 88.5. And it went up for like auction. And the high school bid on it. And this is in the 80s or something. And they won it, right? So then we had a real legitimate FM station at the school, and which was really cool. It was a really crazy thing to have, So you would take your all these different elective classes, but one of them was radio. So you could run an actual radio station that was regulated by the FCC, So
crazy.
It was really crazy. And there were all these rules and things that I learned about radio and learned about music as a result of it. One of them being that you had to have, our station had to be formatted. We couldn't play whatever. We had to pick a format. And so the school had decided at some point, because it was, probably the broadest brush at the time, that it was an alternative station, right? So it could only be alternative, but you could have, we still managed to play some hip hop and stuff. It was a interesting place. It was almost like being at a college station, but you were like, you couldn't drive, And then, it was my freshman year. I worked there. I worked at the radio station all 4 years. But you kind of did. It was like an elective thing, and you had to like be there late at night and, do a lot of work at the radio station. I was kind of just obsessed. And, there was another DJ there who was into ska, and, she knew I was into ska. And so she had landed an interview with Billy Spunk, and she was like, "Hey, you want to sit in?" And, I was not cleared to be on the radio yet, I don't think. So I couldn't say anything. I just sat there and watched, and I was, in awe, and it was so funny, I think it was Bob was he the drummer?
Yeah.
Tall guy. Yeah. So the two of them just walking through my high school, hallways after hours, and me probably like, just beaming up at them, because I'm very short. I know I say that, but I think when you really appreciate it, especially against Bob, it was really, I'm just kind of like this little kid, just like, wow, gee, and and I was just, in awe of them, because, it was the coolest thing. That it's still cool. It's one of those things where you grow up and you grow out of things and you change tastes and things and whatever. And the Blue Meanies were always cool to me because they were, because they did everything, So if I wanted to, I mean, not everything, they didn't really touch on hip hop or electronica or something, but, from a musician standpoint, I mean, there was a lot of, punk and metal and jazz and hardcore and, I don't know, ska and reggae and everything. It was awesome, and I just watched them, and I was just like, it was to see them exist, to see that they were, and it was also kind of weird because they were like normal, nice guys, which was also threw me, because I was like, but they would wear, stockings on their heads and, whatever at the shows would be crazy, but then there were these nice guys,
I asked Billy about this because you told me this story a while back. I asked Billy about it to see if he remembered. And I thought if nothing else, he would remember doing a radio interview on a high school.
Yeah.
Because that seems unusual, but he didn't remember any of that stuff.
At all?
No, he didn't.
I mean, I don't blame him. It was a, that happens to me sometimes too, where, people, when you do enough stuff, you forget the stuff, and it's weird because I met Stan Lee one time, right? I was walking on the street and I saw Stan Lee and I was like, I never approach people. I have to say something, you're Stan Lee. Hi, thank you. Right. And as a function of that, I think you kind of, that meant that was that's a moment to me. That's a story to me. He would, he probably forgot that 20 seconds later, and so I totally understand it, but for me, it was a big thing. I sat there and watched the Blue Meanies get interviewed in my high school. It was cool.
And so you were the only audience member, right?
Yeah. It was,
amazing.
Maybe there might've been, there was another guy who worked the board. I want to say, there was Sharon and there was Dan. And I think Dan was there too. So they ran the show and then I just kind of watched.
Yeah, but both of them had a function to be there. You were just a wallflower.
Yeah, I was a child. I was, I was full on, 14 and, and if I didn't sprout much, but I hadn't sprouted yet, so I was like, I don't know if my voice had changed yet, so it must've been, awkward for them, but, and like I said, I was beaming the whole time. I was just like, wow. Yeah.
What kind of stuff did you do for the station in your high school?
Yeah, eventually I ran some shows. Eventually I had some, I would, every year I would get it, because I can't remember how it worked, but I think every year you had to like test in and apply for it or something, and you would get a show or whatever. And I got some shows, I did it for 4 years. So by I think the second or third year I had my own show. I think the second year I was allowed to be on somebody else's. And that's right. The second year I think I was on somebody else's like hardcore show. And that was the thing is I got, over the course of high school, I kind of had this really, when people go off to college and they discover new music and, and then they, oh, I didn't like that stuff or whatever, and you kind of cycle through. I kind of like front loaded that experience where I spent high school just voraciously consuming music. Right. So I went through all these phases. So like, I was, ska lasted a longer time for me, probably, I would say, because that was my entry point into musical subcultures, right? And so I was probably digging through ska from the time I was about 9 to the time I was about 14 or something. But then from there, it like ramped up really fast where, then I was getting into, punk and hardcore, and then I was getting into like really political hardcore. And then simultaneously I was learning about jazz and funk. And I had at some point gotten a job at a record store. And so then I was learning about everything. I was learning about, classic rock and jazz and, old R&B and mod soul and things like that. And so my radio shows would kind of reflect that, where they would always kind of, it's weird because now I'm like, that's kind of crazy. At the time, it seemed to make total sense to me, but now I'm like, wow, every week, how there was an Onion headline. It was like, local man discovers Led Zeppelin annoys friends, right? And or something like that, or local man is like the first guy to ever hear of Led Zeppelin or something like that. I was like that with everything every week, right? So it'd be like, man, have you heard Herbie Hancock? Whatever, it would be something just different.